Okay, so I'm going to stand up and walk over to the plant I wanted to show you, the garden plant. This is our show and tell segment. And the plant here at my feet is one of the Ardesias we're going to talk about today. It happens to be the nicest looking patch we have in the garden right now. This is Ardezia japonica. It's a dwarf cultivar called Cheerman. Narrower leaves than the wild type and much shorter, probably a third to a half the height. But I wanted to show this to you because it shows you how you want to use this plant in the garden. Okay, so this is a shade plant. We are in the shady part of Asian Valley, and we have this plant growing in with some Asarum and some Mahonia, some Coniogram, Aspidistra, all shade plants. Okay, now this particular patch here is actually several plants, probably 2 or 3 plants. This is actually a shrub, believe it or not, but it's what's called a woody subshrub because it only gets a few inches tall. It actually spreads underground via rhizomes and then pops up. So each individual plant has spread, there's our 3 o'clock train, right on time, has spread to fill in and make this nice evergreen ground cover patch for shade. Okay, so that's the main reason to grow it, is because it is evergreen and it's a shade-loving plant. It's a real nice. Cheerman is actually one of my favorite ones. We're going to see a whole bunch of different ones, but I particularly like this one. It's super dwarf. It's nice and tight. It fits in well with all these other shade plants. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the genus Ardezia, and then I'm going to talk about the species and how to grow it. And then we're going to do some show and tell. We'll get out of I have some show and tell slides, which I'll show. And then I have some show and tell items on my desk here. All right, so Ardezia, y'all can see my screen right now? Good. So Ardezia, the genus name Ardezia, is from the Greek word ardis, which means pointed. And Alexander, if you want to cut to my hand real quick, I can explain what's going on. So there's inside the flower, you have the anthers, which are the pollen-bearing stalks. And in a normal flower, they would be just kind of standing up like this. But inside of Ardezia, and a lot of the species, they come to a point. And so that's what ardis is referring to, is the point where all the anthers kind of come together and make a point. It's actually referring to a spear, the tip of a spear. The Greek word ardis. Okay, we can go back to the slides. Ardezia, the genus Ardezia is in the family Primulaceae, which is a big family. Another ornamental plant that's in that family is cyclamen. So this is related to some of the garden cyclamen, which are in bloom right now. Hidarifolium, at least, is in bloom right now. There is one native, we're talking about a Japanese or an Asian species today, but there's one native species of Ardezia. It's a shrub and it lives in Florida, Central Florida on the coast. So it's like a zone 9, maybe 8B, 9 plant. But it shares a lot of the traits that, some of these ornamental traits we're going to be talking about today. It has some nice berries that attract birds, okay? And that species is Ardezia Escalonioidis, okay? And we don't really grow it here, but in Florida, if you're like a gardener in Florida and you want to have Florida native plants in your garden, you can get a hold of this native evergreen shrub for your Florida native garden, Zone 9 garden. It's 700 species in the genus, mostly tropical. There's a lot. We only grow here in North Carolina. There's really only 2 that we grow. And there's a 3rd species that's used in ornamental horticulture in the United States, but it's only used in Southern Florida. It's another zone 9 plant. But there's tons, they're all over in Asia and Central America, South America, Caribbean islands. There's like 8 or 10 Ardesias native to Jamaica. It's a widespread group, mostly evergreen shrubs, some trees. Ardisia japonica, the one we're going to talk about today, is by far the smallest of these, and it's kind of this subshrub category. The other two ornamental ones that you find are in the United States are Ardezia Chronata, which is a 3 to 6 foot shrub with a ton of red berries on it. It's got kind of a bad name right now. It's fairly invasive, mostly in places south of here. And then there's one called Ardezia elliptica, which is a tree that would only grow in southern Florida. It is also invasive. And Ardezia japonica, the plant we're going to talk about today, does have some invasive tendencies in some specific places, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. All right, so focusing in on the species today, Ardezia japonica, let's talk about how to grow it. Well, its common name, actually, let's do that first. Its common name is marlberry or Japanese Ardezia. The term marlberry is actually used for 3 different Ardezia species, and marl is this kind of broken up seashells and clay that you get under the sand on the coast. And so Tim and I were discussing this earlier, and we think marlberry is actually more in line with the coastal species like the Escalonioidis and elliptica and stuff like that. But some people have assigned marlberry to this as well, even though this is not a coastal species. So the wild type, the plant that Alexander showed you earlier, is a cultivar, a dwarf cultivar called Chiramin, but the wild type is 8 to 16 inches tall, and it has wider leaves than the one Alexander showed you. I don't have a, well, this is as close to the wild type as I have, if Alexander wants to show that. That's kind of, and it's not full height because it's growing in a pot, but that's kind of what a wild type one looks like. This one's got stippled, a little stippled variegation on it. You can ignore that. The wild type is a solid green. The leaves are a glossy evergreen, dark green. The new growth will be shades of copper. I don't see any right now that would be a good example of that, but there's like copper shades, and in some of the cultivars there'll be pink shades in the new growth and light green shades. So, you know, in the summertime, the wild type's just gonna be plain green, but in the spring you get this little subtle hints of color in the new growth. And in the winter, it is an evergreen plant. You'll get some winter coloration of, it darkens into kind of some purples and coppers in the winter. An individual plant, like I mentioned earlier, does spread underground via rhizomes, and it will grow to, a few years to be about a 3 foot wide patch. It's a great ground cover. You can plant a few plants and in a few years have a whole area covered.
Are you advancing through the slides, Dennis?
I am not. I'm not ready to.
Okay.
We're not there yet.
Yes, we're not there yet, Dorothy.
No, we're just talking about growing the plant, and then when I get to the show and tell, I'll show you some.
Gotcha.
I'll show you the slides.
Thank you.
It's notable that although this plant in the garden, we're going to grow it in the shade, which means under the canopy of trees, and it's competing with tree roots. It is notable, though, that it is not drought tolerant. So you will need to keep it looking its best, this nice tight patch that we're sitting next to here. You're going to need to give it some supplemental water during the dry periods. In the wild, if you look it up in the flora, it says grows in quote unquote moist valleys. So it's getting regular in its native home, which is Eastern China, Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. It's getting regular water. This is considered to be a zone 8 plant. And our historical zone here is 7B. But we've had a lot of mild winters, and we've had these in the ground for a decade or more, some of them. And so, it's not been it's been perfectly fine here. So either the plant can't read the zones that it's supposed to be in, or the plant's a little bit hardier than what is recorded. It is evergreen until about the low 20s. At that temperature, it will sustain some leaf burn, which can be mowed off or pruned off in the spring. It's vigorous enough that it'll just push up new growth if you cut off the ugly stuff. It is root hardy to about 10 degrees Fahrenheit. So we get a super cold day, it blasts the whole top off your plant, no problem. You just cut it back and wait until April, and then you'll get some fresh new growth. One tip if you're growing this plant to help prevent burn, and this burn can come in the form of just cold temperatures in the middle of winter, or not quite so cold, but still freezing temperatures like at the end of winter, like our April frosts, that nip the new growth. That is to plant it under evergreen trees, because as the frost tries to settle out, the evergreen trees will protect and keep these things from burning. So let's see. It prefers a slightly acidic pH, which is great for here. It tolerates a wider range, a much wider range, but a pH of about 6 to 6.5 is ideal. It will burn in sun if you put it in too much sun. This is definitely a plant for shade. And when we say part shade to shade, on that part shade bit, we do mean protection from afternoon sun, that part shade should be morning sun. It will burn in full sun, and the variegated forms, which I have a lot to show you in a bit, burn quicker and easier than the pure green. They are also slightly less cold hardy than the pure green, even though we do grow some in the garden here. This plant flowers for us. It just finished up its flowering like last month. It flowers in June and July. Some cultivars a little earlier than that. And the flowers come in clusters of like 3 to 5 little white or light pink flowers. They're small, they're ½ inch. They're not particularly showy. And then right now what we have forming are some berries, and I'll show you some of the berries on these potted plants in a bit. And right now they're mostly green. We're in that transition period where the berries are just forming. And starting in October, and certainly by November, they will have turned bright red, which is a nice ornamental trait. And is one of the uses of this plant is actually as a potted plant at holiday time and New Year's. The berries are persistent. They will, as long as a bird doesn't eat them, they will stay on the plant all winter long. And so in Japan, they use this in floral arrangements to celebrate the Japanese New Year. And we could use it at Christmas or Thanksgiving or any other time that we might want to have some red berries and some dark evergreen leaves in a pot in our holiday arrangements. So that's pretty good. Let's see. The birds do like the fruit. They don't eat them fast, but they will eat them. And so it is a good plant for supporting wildlife, which is nice. It is said to be deer and insect resistant. Now I say that, deer resistant, and in my head I'm remembering Doug, who did a lot of these midweek talks. And the first thing he would always say when he would say it's deer resistant, he says, I know someone in the audience is going to say, but the deer ate mine. So, we all know the deer don't read the books to know what's deer resistant or not, but it is supposed to be. It's got these thick leathery leaves, and some of the cultivars, they have a toothed edge, and some of the cultivars are super crinkly. And so it's the kind of texture that deters a deer if it's not terribly hungry. If it's terribly hungry, it'll still eat it more than likely. It's supposed to be fairly insect resistant too. And I say that again, grain of salt. I pulled all these potted plants out of the greenhouse, and there are signs of a past insect infestation on them. So insect tolerant, let's just say. And they don't really suffer from too many diseases. So, I mean, it's not it's not deer food. It's not rabbit food necessarily. It's not going to be eaten alive by slugs and whatever. So, but, caveat emptor, right? The species, the wild species, Ardisia japonica, is native to Japan, Korea, and eastern China. It has been brought into the U.S. For ornamental uses and has escaped, and in some places is becoming a bit of a pest. There are 3 counties in northern Florida where Ardisia japonica has been declared invasive. And then in central Florida, just south of there and just north of there in like coastal South Carolina and just west of there in like southern Louisiana, they are watching it. It's on the watch list for being a potentially invasive plant. So up here, it's not considered invasive right now, but we all know with global warming in 30 or 50 years, Raleigh is going to be just as hot as northern Florida is today. So this might be one of those plants that has its use now, and then you have to rip up in 20 years or 30 years. It does, not only does it spread by stolons, and you can divide it in the garden to very easily, you can take tip cuttings too, but it also spreads by seed, and the seed do come true pretty well. If you have a cultivar, the seedlings tend to be similar to the adults. Okay, so that's how to grow it. And before I get into the show and tell, you're just going to talk about a few other things. This plant in Asia is used in traditional Chinese medicine. It's one of the 50, what do they call it, essential plants for Chinese medicine. There is, I mentioned earlier, I don't know if I mentioned earlier or not, but the genus, several species of the genus are being studied for medicinal use. Today, several species produce a chemical called Ardezia quinones, which is being studied for its use as a potential anti-inflammatory. So it does sport readily, and if Alexander if you can see my table, you'll see that here I've got 30 different cultivars, and so it does make mutations quite often, and so that's pretty cool. If you have one, you keep your eye out on it for sports. We have in the greenhouse, I didn't bring them out, but we have 3 or 4 or 5 sports that we're keeping our eye on to see if they'll be worthy of putting a name on. This is a popular Cotinenge plant, and that's in fact why we have so many of them, is we have this Cotinenge collection. Those of you who haven't seen the Cotinenge video we did a year and a half ago now, go to our YouTube page and check that out. We did a whole bit about it. Cotinenge is a Japanese method of displaying certain types of plants in small ornamental pots. There's a handful of species that the Japanese like to use in their small ornamental pots, and Ardisia japonica is one of those. Because it is a small plant, because it sports so much, and you have so many interesting cultivars. And the Japanese, they love to go down that rabbit hole of tracking every nuance of every different, this leaf's a little bit more crinkled than that leaf. Well, that's a new cultivar. And this leaf's got a slightly wider silver edge, then that's a new cultivar. So that's why it makes such a popular Cotinenge plant. It's also used, as I mentioned earlier, in tea ceremonies and in to celebrate the Japanese New Year, in flower arrangements that they might have. I'm going to be talking about this plant. I've talked about this plant a little bit about its use in the garden as a garden plant, and we did see how it fits nicely into the garden. And we have it here at the Arboretum. We have 6 different cultivars in the garden in about 14 different spots. And some of them are not watered enough and are not doing so great, and some of them are being overrun by taller plants. But they're good garden plants, but they are all superb potted plants. As you can see from the table here, all the different potted plants that I have. And especially, if we're going to be using this as a holiday decoration with the berries and the evergreen dark leaves. A potted plant would be the best way to do that, to display that. So before we get into the cultivars, some of you might be wanting to know where to buy this plant. There are 3 that are common in the trade. The wild type, Ardezia japonica, is common in the trade. You can find it online, mail order, or probably in most local nurseries. And if they don't have it, you can ask for it. Cheerman, the one that Alexander pointed the camera at early on, is fairly common in the trade. It's a dwarf. And then there's a white variegated one called White King. That's the trademark name. The cultivar name is Hakuou. And don't ask me what that means. But it's also quite common in the trade. It's bigger than Sherman. Probably the variegated ones probably aren't quite as tall as the wild type, but White King is fairly vigorous. So let's go to the slides now. Are they looking at my slides right now?
I took them down so they could see the pictures or the plants better.
Okay, I'll share my screen again.
Yes.
Okay, so now y'all are looking at my screen?
Yes.
Wonderful. So we'll start with just Ardezia japonica, the straight species. The photo here, you can see what it looks like in a garden on the right behind the bench, just as an evergreen ground cover for shade. The close-up picture shows you kind of the new growth and how it's a little bit coppery. Some of the cultivars, the new growth is more pinkish than it is coppery, but on the wild type, it's more coppery. And the picture on the left, you can see that it is a great potted plant. In fact, here it's being used as a hanging basket plant. You can see all of the rhizomes coming out of that pot. And you can see why it's such a good spreader in the ground because of all those rhizomes. Okay, so I'm going to talk about kind of groups of cultivars, and when we get to a group, if I have more than one cultivar to show you, I'll probably go through the individuals pretty quickly. This particular cultivar here, Andre the Giant, is probably the only one that's bigger than the wild type. It's got bigger leaves, bigger fruit, and that's why you grow it. You can kind of see on the photo on the right what the flowers look like, little clusters dangling down. The photo in the middle shows its kind of winter coloration where it takes on purple coppery tones. And the 2 photos on the left show it in the garden here at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. We had a lot of it in the lath house until Tim got to it and pulled it out. And we have currently we have a couple of patches of it in other places. It's a bigger, coarser texture than the Cheerman that we looked at first. It's a much bigger plant. All right, Cheerman is the next one we're going to see. It's a dwarf, and there's a couple of dwarfs on the market. There's Cheerman here. I wanted to show you this because you can see the flower clusters on the right and the berries on the left. So those are 2 different months, call the right July and the left November. And then up top, you can see that actually is a photo of right where we're sitting right here in Asian Valley, showing the Cheerman with the little green berries on it. Probably taken, this was taken a couple of years ago, but it was probably taken right around this time. Because we're at this stage right now where we have these green berries that have just formed and are going to be slowly turning red. So the fruit is red. Here is a cultivar, Izu Shinju, which has white fruit. We got most of our cultivars we got from just 3 sources. Okay, we got the bulk of them from a Japanese nursery called Chuetsuenge. And we got them a year or 2 ago. Most of these potted plants are from that. We got one from Plant Delights. They don't currently sell it, but they sold it a year ago, and we picked up a pot. And then we got a handful, a half dozen or so of our collection from Nurseries Caroliniana. Nurseries Caroliniana is, they currently, in the US at least, are the ones selling the most cool, interesting cultivars, variegated ones and whatnot. The guy who owns that nursery makes trips to Japan, I don't know, frequently, maybe not annually, but frequently, and is picking up Japanese Ardisia japonica from sources there. So if you want to get some of these esoteric cultivars, that's the best place to get them. Other than we do have plans to propagate these and distribute some, so keep your eyes open for that. But I did want to show you, let me go back, Izu Shinju, because it does have white fruit, and that is an unusual trait. All right, the next one, there's a whole bunch of cultivars that we're going to lump together into white variegated cultivars. The main one, the one that you'll see on the market here frequently, is called Hakuo. I guess that's how you say that. Blake, can you help me out?
Hakuo.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, Hakuo. Blake spent some time in Japan, and so I'm going to refer all Japanese pronunciation to him. It's trademarked under the name White King, and you can see it's just a nice white edged, irregular edge variegation. New growth comes out, coppery colored with some pink tones, and that potted plant on the right, that's from our collection here. You can see that it does sport with solid white branches. Those don't do much on their own, you know, but it looked pretty there, so we kept it. There's another one, if you're shopping around, you'll see Hakuo Kan, which is trademarked under the name White King Crown. Mark and I were looking at this, comparing the two, and they are, to our eyes, identical. They're the same height, same color, same leaf shape, same everything. We did look up, Mark does have a book of Japanese variegated plants in his office, and it is listed in that book as two separate cultivars. So, you know, and in the trade, both are sold, and they're sold interchangeably with the names all mixed up. So don't worry about it. If you get White King or White King Crown, Hakuo or Hakuo Kan, as far as the performance in the garden, you're getting the same plant. Okay. Here's another one, Kokikan. The differences between these variegated cultivars, these white variegated cultivars, will be in the size. Some of them are more dwarf than others. Most of them are dwarfer than wild type. Vigor and the width of the margin. Some of them have a center white and a green edge, and most of them have a white edge and a green center. This one here is really weird, and I know you can get this one from Nurseries Caroliniana because I was just looking at their website today when I was thinking about this lecture. Amanagawa, which is Japanese, not Spanish, Japanese for Milky Way. And so you can see the irregular white sectors on the edge of the leaf kind of do give an effect of stars. And it is a green edge and a center. We'll call that pale yellow. You could call it light green, chartreuse, whatever. So it's an interesting variegated leaf. This is also an unusual one in that the leaf is quite contorted, and that is another of the groups that you'll see in the Japanese cultivars are the contorted leaf ones. Biwa Nishiki, another white edge variegated. Fuji, another white edge variegated. There's a lot of them. You can see if you look at the edge of the width of the edge, it's, you know, they're all different a little bit. By the way, I'm going to go through some of these pretty quick, but Blake, I think, did you put the link in? Okay, so Blake, if you check the chat, Blake put a link into this slide package, so you can open it up and look at these things at your leisure. Hanaguru, that one's another white edged, very crinkled one, and you can see that the new growth comes out very variegated, and then as the leaves expand and get bigger, the white edge gets narrower and narrower and narrower. Goshogaruma, another one like that. Homare. Now you're looking at this, and first of all, that pot that you're seeing on the slide, that is an example of a good kotenenge pot. We're trying to expand our collection of kotenenge pots, the same style that they would use in Japan. They are phenomenally expensive. So most of our collection is in terracotta, plain terracotta pots, or just glazed pots from Lowe's. So, but I do know Mark got his eyes out for saving his pennies and every once in a while getting a real nice Asian, real authentic Asian kotenenge pot. Homare is just has the sliverest of thinnest of thin silver edges. You can't hardly even see it in this photo. And I did bring a plant of it up, and I was looking at it today and even staring at it, you know, from a foot away in full res. I could still barely tell that it's just barely variegated on the edge. But that's what you gotta love about the Japanese. That's a nuance. That's exactly what they like, is that tiny little variegated edge. Miyonishiki, not all of the variegated ones are edged. This one is more sectoral. And there are speckled ones as well. We'll have some pictures of some speckled ones coming up. This one here, Ito Fukurin, is a white-edged one, but it's also pretty cool. The leaves have a silvery sheen to them, so you could call it a silver with a white edge, real thin white edge. Okay, so the other color you get in variegated Ardezia japonicas is yellow. And when I say yellow, I mean pale yellow. And there is a gradation from, is it white or cream or pale yellow? And sometimes it's all of them on the same plant. So don't think that this is a box, you know, a pigeonhole that we're putting these plants in. It is definitely a scale, and you're somewhere on the scale of yellow. So, but here's a few pictures of some ones that are yellow variegated. Asahi, Hanatai, and Hanatai, you can see it from the picture on the left, comes out white and then fades yellow, or comes out yellow and fades white. Hinodi, a center yellow with a pale green edge. I have that one up here. Narrow leaves too. Usawa, similar, a center pale yellow and a pale green edge. Usawa also has a colorful stem. You can see it's kind of a pinkish brown, we'll call that. And there are other cultivars that have an even brighter stem. And that's one of the, in addition to being variegated or having a interesting leaf edge or crinkled surface, having a different colored stem is another one of the factors that the Japanese are selecting cultivars from. So moving out of the yellow variegated ones into the crinkled ones. Okay, so here is Beni Nosukasa, and it's got large kind of spoon-shaped leaves, and they have a wavy edge instead of the toothed edge. Nosukasa is the tooths are larger, and they come out variegated white, and unfortunately they also burn very easily. But we also have the unusual edge to that leaf. Kimiyago, very crinkled, and you can see from the photo on the left, which was taken in a garden, burns easy too. Some of these variegated ones are definitely better as potted plants than they are as garden specimens, unless you can really protect them. Super crinkled. Blake, you want to take a stab at that?
Sugigahana.
Sugigahana, okay. We'll go with that. Very irregular, wide, white edge variegation. And and very, very crinkled leaf. That's actually, I kind of like that. I don't know if any of y'all have a favorite so far. You can put it in the chat. Okay, a few of the cultivars have speckled leaves. And no, that's not insect damage. It is actual, the variegation of it. And the speckling makes them look, it's usually white speckling on the green surface, and it makes them look kind of yellowish. So here's Koshi Nohana with the speckled leaves, which you can see better on the photo on the left, the plant in the garden. This one's a more heavily speckled one, Maruyama Sunago. Blake, you're going to speak up if I really butcher one of these, right?
For sure.
Okay,
I got you,
good,
Dennis.
good.
You're doing fine.
Yeah? Okay, good,
sure.
good. Calcan, colorful stems. Okay, so here's pink. New growth is pink, and the stem is also pink. And of course, the leaf is variegated with we'll call it a cream to pale yellow center with a light green edge. And my last slide, before we go to the show and tell, is of a sport we have. Now, this is not a sport that we have at the Arboretum. It's just one I found in our photo collection. But I just wanted to talk about that. If you want to collect these Ardesias, keep your eyes out for sports. They sport very readily. Like I said, we have 5 or 6 sports in our greenhouse that we are keeping our eye on right now to see if they're going to be worthy of a name.
We got a couple questions here, Dennis.
Yeah, let's go ahead and take some questions before we...
Marilyn's asking, so do you keep the potted ones in a greenhouse over the winter?
So, yes, I would. All right, we keep ours in a greenhouse, and they do not get exposed to any cold. When you have a plant in a pot, and that pot is above ground, the roots are exposed to wider swings in temperature than they would be if the plant was in the ground. That makes them more susceptible to cold damage. So yes, if you want to have a potted Ardezia, you can have it out all summer, and then once it starts to get cold, put it somewhere, give it some winter protection.
And Jean is asking, do you have to keep pinching back the plants that you grow in a pot as houseplants?
You can, we don't. And when we get to the show and tell, I'll put some pots here on the corner for Alexander to show you. They want to spread wide rather than grow tall. So if we're going to be pinching anything, we'll be pinching the stolons or rhizomes that are running over the edge or out at the bottom of the plant. Cool, great. All right, Alexander, if we want to go back to the, I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yes.
Oh, you already did that? Great.
Gotcha.
And I'm just going to put some here on the corner, and Alexander can focus on them. So here's one of our pseudo Kotenenge pots on a speckled, it's kind of both speckled and variegated cultivar. And this cultivar is Mio Nishiki. A lot of our greenhouse plants could use a shot of fertilizer. They're going to be paler green than they would be if they're in the ground. Let's see, turn that a little bit. And Alexander, you can see right here, the berries are green now because it's September, and they just formed from blooms that occurred last month or the month before, and they will turn red over the next couple months and then persist all winter. Nishiki. This is one of the speckled leaf group that we were talking about. A couple of dwarfs. I really am keen on the dwarfs. I just like them for some reason. All right, 2 here. I'm going to rotate the tag out of the way. The one on the left, on your right, my left, this one is the dwarfest of the dwarf ones that we know of right now. That's Angio Pixie. You can get that from Nurseries Caroliniana. It's on their website right now. I checked today. Plant Delights used to sell it, and they might sell it again. But it is by far the dwarfest. It's got the tiny, tiny little leaves, and makes a really cute pot plant right there. But it also, I think, would make a great little, as long as you don't let it get overrun you can put it in the garden too. That is, I will say, these dwarf ones here in our garden, we have ones that are being overrun, and they'll do phenomenally well in very deep shade, being overrun by a plant for a while, and then they will peter out. So the one next to it, right here, is Chairman, which is the same as the one Alexander pointed at the camera at the beginning of the show. And I did want to point out that the berries on this greenhouse specimen have already started turning a little bit red, and they'll just get redder and redder. These are 2 dwarf cultivars. So let's look at some crinkled leaf ones. This one is Sugigahana, and it could be doing a little better in the pot. It's not nearly as vigorous as the others, but you can see it's extremely, once Alexander gets in, zooms in close enough, extremely crinkled and extremely variegated as well.
What was the name of the nursery you said that had?
Nurseries Caroliniana.
Nurseries Carolina.
And their website is nurcar.com, NURCAR.com. They're in South Carolina. They're a good friend of the Arboretum. They donated a lot of our Ardezias to us, and they donate a lot of other plants as well. If you have participated in any of our auctions in the last year or so, you have probably seen some Nurseries Caroliniana plants. This is a Nosukasa, which has kind of the spoon-shaped leaves. Unusual. Kind of an odd leaf margin there. Very collectible. And let's move on. We've done dwarf ones. We've done crinkled ones. Let's look at a yellow center, a yellow variegated one. This is Hinode. A narrow yellow center and a wide green edge. The sun, unfortunately, let me see if I can rotate it a little bit. The sun is, even though we're in the shade, the sun is just right. You really can't make that variegation out too well. This is one of the ones that's, I believe, in the slide deck though. So let's see if I can get a better yellow variegated one. Now this is yellow partly because it's hungry for fertilizer, but you can see the center yellow variegation. Actually, yeah, for some reason it's coming out better than the other. You can also, Alexander, if you look at the bottom of the pot, you can see its tendency to want to spread via rhizomes, which is good in the garden. It's not a rampant spreader. You call it a slow spreader. It's also good in a pot. It means you can divide it and make more and give them to your friends. Sell them on Etsy, do whatever. Okay. Oh, I just lost my mic.
Uh-oh.
Let's do a variegated one. And then we can go with some more questions and finish this thing up. This is Kimigayo. A real nice pale green center and on the new growth at least, a wide, we'll call that cream edge, although some people might call that a super pale yellow. And then on the older leaves, the edge kind of gets narrower and narrower. And then Alexander, if you want to back up and kind of show the whole table, we've got a couple, we'll call it a couple dozen in our Cotenenge collection alone, plus another 6 that we have in the garden. We have one of the biggest Ardisia japonica collections here at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum that you'll find in the United States. And Mark's a big fan of them, which is why we're talking about this today. Mark and I had a talk when he asked me to do this lecture. What do you want to talk about? And I gave him some choices. He says, well, let's do the Ardezia. So that was his, he really likes this. Any final questions?
Yeah, sure. Marilyn says that she read on Nurseries Caroliniana's website that voles love to eat the rhizomes of these. Have we had any issues with voles here in the garden with them?
No, well, if we have, that hasn't been the main problem. Okay, I would say the main problem we have is probably the same problem that Alexander said he was having, is lack of water. We do irrigate the garden, but not daily. We irrigate it kind of more like a home gardener would irrigate, and so spots that tend to be dry or go without irrigation for too long, the plants have thinned out. The other problem we have is we plant stuff so densely that if we plant a more vigorous, taller plant like a Tricertus or a fern, an Ethereum or something near it that's taller and spreading, it's going to spread right over it.
Cool.
So no, I read that same thing on the Nurseries Caroliniana website, that voles like to eat the roots, but I can't say that that's our worst problem with them.
Sure. Hale's asking, how hardy is the Chronata species?
Chronata is supposed to be a little bit less hardy. It is also invasive in northern Florida, and it's supposed to be a little bit less hardy. We do have some here at the Arboretum. I believe ours are all in pots right now, so I can't really comment on the garden hardiness.
Okay. And Marilyn's asking, so how moist of a site will they do well in? Can it be very moist?
No, they don't like standing water. So moist, but not soaking wet all the time.
Oh, so just ideal garden conditions.
Ideal garden conditions, yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's no problem. We got that.
Yeah, no standing water.
Okay. And I believe that is all of the questions that we have in the chat. So I would just like to thank everybody for joining us today as we got up with Dennis and learned more about Ardisia japonica. I would like to invite you to join us next week at 3 o'clock on Wednesday, where we will be having a Garden Conversations midweek program. We'll have Sophia, our nursery technician. She will be talking with Charles Heatherly, the volunteer beekeeper, and they'll be discussing beekeeping, pollinators, all that jazz. It'll be a good time. So please join us for that next week. Thanks again for stopping by. Take care, y'all.